Hello and welcome to the last part of lecture 6. So now we are going to talk about the economic consequences of COVID-19 crisis. So it's a very difficult subject because apparently the things are happening as we watch them, and the only thing that I can talk about today is either the analysis of the short term of the crisis that we have some data about, or some projections for the future, which come from our intuition or some modeling devices. And this is going to be the subject of this third part of the lecture. But before going into the analysis, the macroeconomic analysis, let me first show you some graphs that certainly will be remembered by the economists for a very long time. Things that have never happened in the history of global economics. Number one is this graph. I'm pretty sure that some of you has already seen this type of graph and this particular graph in general. So what you see here is the in red line. This is the number of new unemployment claims in the United States, and this is a time series from 1967, so 50 years ago, till today. And the two last bars you can see here are the bars from the 21st of March and 28th of March. So apparently the moment when the crisis, the COVID crisis hit the American economy. So what you see is that the scale of this graph has been significantly disrupted, with previous maximum equal to 700,000 new claims for unemployment in the United States in the middle of the 1980s recession, 665,000 in the middle of the global financial crisis of 2008-2009, the subprime crisis we already analyzed. And here you see that in March 21st, there were 3.3 million new applications for unemployment benefit in the US. A week later, it's 6.6 million. Another week, it's 6.9 million. And then 5 million in the beginning of April. Now we have a new data from April 18, which is not in the graph, and it's 4.5 million new unemployment claims. And this means that in total, in almost 1 month, you have something like 27 million unemployed people in the US. So to put this number in a perspective, I think in 2015, there were something like 150 million working people in the United States. And out of those 150 million people, in 4 weeks, you have 27 million people being, kicked out of work, unemployed, immediately. Like this is crazy. One explanation here, it might also be the fact that the regulation has changed in middle of March in the United States, which means that more people are now eligible for applying for the unemployment insurance, which means that in those numbers you can see here, more people are, in fact, more people can send the claim, send the request for claim. What does it mean? It simply means that some of those people you have here in those millions per week are actually people who previously were not eligible for unemployment benefit. That is why a share, but not the majority, but the share of those people are actually new people who entered the labor market and immediately entered unemployment. Okay, but still, this number makes a big effect, and it's something that the economy will recover in the medium run, but not in the short term. That's what I meant. Okay. The second thing, this is the index of Standard and Poor's 500, which is the main stock price index on New York Stock Exchange. And what you see is that in just a couple of days from the peak, which is the all-time record in prices on the US Stock Exchange, So from the peak in just a couple of days, the market went something like 30% down. And apparently, what they say here is that it equalizes the level that the market experienced in March 2017, which means that the whole growth of 3 last years has been wiped out in just a couple of days. And this shows you what was the magnitude of panic on the financial markets. And comparing this to other recessions that the US economy has experienced or other super negative shocks, the level that was reached by the markets, so the downward pressure that was experienced by the market in year 2020 due to the COVID-19 crisis, is comparable to what has been done in 35 days in the year 1929 when the Great Depression started. Okay, and it's comparable to the biggest crisis or biggest one-day decline in the prices of American stocks, which was in 1987. But it took 38 days to more or less have the same downward pressure on the financial market. So you see that this is a really shocking decrease in just couple of days. So you see how the market dramatically reacted to the actual situation. But apparently, what realized is that even though this is once again S&P 500 index, so even though there was this huge downswing for a couple of days, what happened later on, and this is second part of March and the first part of April, is that S&P went back upwards. So more than 50% of the fall has been already how you call it in English, made back, okay, which means that the market is actually really swinging up and down. I think today the S&P is at 2,900 points, which means it's even a bit higher than what is plotted here in this figure. And this is really crazy performance of the financial markets. And the last graph, which is very symptomatic of what is happening right now in the financial and commodity market, is the price of oil. And I'm pretty sure that you heard about those crazy things which are happening on the oil. And apparently, first of all, the most important thing is that oil is trading now very low. So here in the graph, you can see that it's trading at around $25 per barrel. It's not true anymore because this is quite old data, I think from 2 weeks ago. Now the 1 barrel of oil is trading for around $10, which comparing to the average price in the last 20 years and the maximum price that was just before the 2008-2009 crisis, which is over here, it's something totally unseen in the last few decades. And one more interesting thing related to this particular commodity is the price of oil that some media told you that is going to be negative, or there was negative in one day of April, I'm pretty sure 1 week ago, which is not that much the case. So of course the case is that there was a negative price, but what financial instrument was this whose price went down? To know this, you have to go back to our lecture on the financial crisis of 2008-2009, because what I'm plotting here is not the price of oil, which is the data or the information that was out there in the media. It is the price of the futures contract for oil, which is a derivative on the value of oil. And what the futures contracts define, as you know it, hopefully from the previous lectures, is that it gives you a right to buy commodity today with a delivery in the future. And what got a negative price on the market was the price of the futures contract for oil for the end of May. And apparently, how the contracts are traded on US stock exchange is that those contracts are traded month by month. And apparently, on the 20th of April, the series of contracts has changed. So the contracts for May are going were stopped to be trading, and the day after, the contracts for June are going to be traded, which means this was the last day of trading of the futures contracts for delivery for end of May of oil, right? So what does it mean? It simply means that this is the last time that you can either buy or sell a contract that gives you oil in the end of May. And of course, on the oil market, as on every other commodity market, there are not only investors who invest in oil because they want to get oil or want to sell oil. There are also a lot of speculants. And apparently, speculants play in this way that they are actually, buying contracts, but then reselling them just before the contract is expiring, so that they make profit on the price of the contract itself. They just don't want to get oil. Why investment banks should have, oil? Of course, this is only speculation. So, in fact, what happens in this particular moment of time is that those speculative traders who were left with those futures contracts for oil, they simply wanted to sell them as they usually do it when the contract finishes. But apparently, due to the current situation on the market and the recession on the horizon, and the fact that there was also some disruption in the OPEC plus cartel that is setting up the prices and deciding about the supply, all of those things taken together caused that the actual demand for this delivery of oil in the end of May was super low. So those speculants who were left with those future contracts, they had two options. Either they keep the contract, which means that they are going to be left with some barrels of oil in the end of May. So they had to find some facilities or infrastructure to stock oil. And apparently this is also what happened. And this is very interesting because the price of stocking oil went up like skyrocketed in this particular moment of time, because those investors, they didn't want to sell the contract. Some of them wanted to keep the contract, but then you get the physical oil, so you have to do something with this. So they they bought some containers, some huge ships in which they rented ships in which you can store oil and stuff like this, and prices of those storing facilities went up like crazy in this moment of time. But there is a second part of those speculants with the contracts who, didn't want to get the oil in the end of May. So what they did, of course, what you do is simply you sell the instrument on the market. And apparently what happened is that the price of this instrument became negative, which means they were actually, the guys who sold the instrument actually had to pay for the other side who wanted to buy the instrument. As crazy as this. But remember, this is not the price of oil that went negative, it's the price of the futures contract of oil. This is a different financial instrument. One is the base instrument, and the other is a derivative. And the price of derivative was negative, not the price of the base instrument. But still, the price of base instrument is now below or around $10 per barrel, which is also something super crazy. If you go to the petrol station in Luxembourg, you will see a big difference comparing to a situation 1 month ago when the price of oil was €1.20. Now it's 90 cents per liter. Crazy as this. So you see that there are things that are actually happening right now in the macroeconomy that have never been seen in the history of the global economy, and this simply shows how big a recession we are experiencing and how difficult a situation we are in. Therefore, it is very important to talk about those things and think about solutions for the short, medium, and long term. And hopefully, I will give you some hints about what is happening right now and what are the main channels of transmission of this COVID-19 crisis to the real economy. So let's start with the economic impact and direct consequences of COVID. So first of all, the main and the most frightening consequence of this crisis is supply interruptions, or the fact that the supply chain in the production process is broken, is interrupted. The production process in many sectors of the economy is super complex. and the supply chain is very strongly vertically integrated. So you have many subcontractors, in the production process, and you need inputs from very different places of the macroeconomy, from different countries of the world and from different sectors. It's super hard to build a car. It's super hard to build, an iPhone, and you can imagine how difficult it is to have all the components available at the right supply at the good time. And actually, this is now interrupted. This process is interrupted, which means that even though some sectors are actually could operate normally in the economy because they are not directly affected by the COVID-19 crisis, they cannot, because some other sectors on which they are relying, they are not producing the intermediate goods which are needed to produce the final goods in this sector. And this is something super frightening because this might cause a collapse in the whole manufacturing, heavy light manufacturing sector, and recovering from this supply chain interruption takes a lot of time, because even though firm which is fifth in the supply chain can start operating normally, it is constrained by the fact that firms that are on lower parts of the supply chain are not operating, and this means that there is a contagion effect of interruptions in the production process. Then there are, of course, demand disruptions, drop in aggregated demand, mainly caused by the fact that people are now becoming more risk averse. They don't know what's going to happen in the future, so the level of uncertainty for the future is increasing as hell. So nobody knows what will be the situation in 1 week, in 1 month, and 1 year. That is why, if you were planning to buy a car or you were planning to buy some other assets, potentially you are taking a wait and see strategy and delay your purchase and postpone investment. And this dramatically decreases the demand for assets, for goods, and for all the stuff that you can trade on the market. Which means that we are in a very bad situation. We have, on the one hand, the supply, negative supply shock, and on the other hand, we have a negative demand shock. Those are, of course, not equivalent, not equal to each other across sectors. And now the question is, which regime dominates in what sector? What sectors are supply constrained and what sectors are demand constrained? This is a kind of important question for the economists. Then, of course, we have reduction in productivity due to the safety measures and remote working, and the fact that the capacity of producing is not as big as it was 1 month ago, and it will not be as high as it was before the crisis in the future, because you have those safety measures like masks, like additional social distancing. Not everyone can work at the same time, at the same place. So this will significantly decrease the productivity of all the factors of production. And finally, the direct consequence of the COVID is, of course, the lockdown of many economies of the world, which drives a super high decrease in production in specific sectors, because some sectors are completely closed. Collapse of services, tourism, transport, and entertainment industries, which means that some other industries or some other sectors of the economy are totally wiped out, are totally closed, and apparently, if they don't get financial aid, they will just bankrupt and become non-existent. Take the tourism sector. Those tourist operators, even though they had hard time even before the crisis, now they are just on the verge of being bankrupt. The same for transport, the same for the airlines and businesses similar to those. Then there is a ban of most traveling, including cross-border commuting, and this particular thing is kind of important from the point of view of Luxembourg as well. As you know, 50% of workers in Luxembourg, almost 50% of workers in Luxembourg are cross-border commuters, which means if there is a disruption in commuting across country borders, this causes a significant supply constraint for many sectors. Actually, for the moment, the borders of Luxembourg are opened for workers. Then some workers work from home and use the teleworking devices. That is why we don't see each other in person, but I have to, pursue my YouTuber career right now. And it's fine if you don't have any things, all the things that make your life difficult at home. For example, kids. I have nothing against kids, but apparently, if you have a 3-year-old kid at home, your productivity will be super low because you just cannot do two things at once. That is why closing of schools is one of the important measures taken by the government, but it's something that significantly decreases parents' availability to work and productivity of home working workers. Okay. And of course, the direct consequence of COVID-19 is, of course, also the overload of the medical sector, which is not that visible in Luxembourg, but was a huge constraint in Lombardia, in Spain, and in, for example, in Poland. It's also one of the biggest problems right now, because this sector is also constrained by the fact that you don't have enough medical workers, you don't have enough people who can heal other people, and this is problematic because, to put it differently, this is the main measure for the government. This is the main motivation for the government to implement all of those measures regarding the social distancing, regarding lockdown of the economies, to have a humanitarian approach towards those who are actually ill, and they can be healed. They can be how to say it? They can simply have a safe place in a hospital and not be ill anywhere else. Okay. So in general, if you were to plug all of those elements into one graphics, you would see that there are some agents of the global economy, like households, government, businesses, financial sector, and all the other countries, because we are talking about the global economy. And you can link those agents with across themselves with some actual financial flows, including consumer spendings, which links households and businesses, including wages, salaries, including investment expenditures, payments for imports, payments for exports, supply chain flows. All of those flows of cash have been interrupted by the COVID-19 crisis, which is a scary thing because, as I told you in the beginning, and the global economic system is such a complex system that if you interrupt one flow of payments, this might have a cascade effect for other sectors which are directly not related to the initial shock. And this was in fact also the case in the 2008-2009 crisis of the subprime mortgage market. You saw that only one flow of payments was interrupted in this crisis. Paying off those subprime mortgages by people who were ninjas, right? Those guys stopped repaying their mortgages. This induced that some financial instruments in which big banks invested became worthless, and this caused liquidity problems in the banking sector, and it translated, immediately to the real economy. And in 2 years, the whole world was in a recession. So you see this cascade movement of interconnection of different markets, which are initially you would not expect they are connected. This is something that is symptomatic for those global crises in the age of globalization. And apparently, the COVID-19 crisis is something way more severe than what we expected, than what we experienced in 2008-2009, because now the COVID-19 is actually attacking not only the financial sector, but also the real economy. The fact that economies cannot produce, firms cannot, serve customers, and households have no income unless the government is helping those guys who are on unemployment. But then, if the government is helping, then the government is a very, very difficult situation because the level of debt increases exponentially over time. So yes, so it is just to tell you that the situation is very, very serious, and the interconnection and the complexity of the analysis of this microeconomic system is such that I'm pretty sure not many people understand actually what consequences can be for the global economy. So the long-term consequences, long-term economic impact of the COVID can be divided into those three subgroups. And for the real economy, for example, we can experience bankruptcies of firms. Of course, there is a huge helping plan of the governments to stop to help firms keeping their liquidity, but whether or not it is sustainable in the medium term, in the short term it is, but in the medium term it's such a big cost for many governments that apparently you never know what is worse: collapses of banks, or collapses of countries, or collapses of firms. Then, under supply of goods, the fact that the supply chain is interrupted, the production process is interrupted, of course, the supply of goods is going to be interrupted as well. And hopefully, this will not be in the strategic and main branches of the economy, like food, like those goods which are the basic goods, because then one can experience kind of severe consequences of this particular situation, including mass poverty, including conflicts for resources. But the direct consequence of undersupply of goods is, of course, what you know from microeconomic classes: rising prices for specific goods which are under this lower supply. For individuals, we can expect huge unemployment, insolvency, and the fact that people will not be able to repay credits and mortgages. What is also important is that people might be very very negative towards some policies that are proposed by the governments. Apparently, they can be frustrated with the situation, the fact that the help that they get from the actual help they get from the government is not sufficient, which once again means that they might turn to those politicians who want to give them even more, and those nationalistic and populistic movements might be even more important due to the fact that people are simply losing a lot of their wealth, a lot of well-being, a lot of income. And then for financial markets, what we experience and what we can expect for the future is the volatility of asset prices, unpaid credits and liquidity problems of banking sector, which leads directly to the banking crisis, quite similar to the one we had in 2008-2009, but of course more severe, and deterioration of balance sheets, which is to some extent mitigated by the policies of the central banks in many countries, which we are going to talk about in a couple of slides. So in general, the situation is very, very difficult, and making predictions for the near future is something that is very risky and subject to a lot of error that you can make in terms of what things are going to be crucial in the coming weeks and months. But apparently, some institutions are actually predicting some macroeconomic indicators. For example, WTO, so the World Trade Organization, proposes this actual prediction of the global trade volume in the near future. So what you see over here is the pre 2008-2009 crisis trend of trade, of increase in trade over time, which was disrupted by the 2008-2009 crisis, so that the new trend was established after the subprime crisis, which is now interrupted by the COVID-19 crisis. And the optimistic scenario, which is let's say the V-type recession, which means that we have a very sharp decrease in the short term, but a very sharp increase in the medium term. In this scenario, they predict that trade will come back to the pre-crisis trend, which is something that I don't know if many people believe, but okay, fair enough. And the pessimistic scenario, which means that we are going to establish a very strong decrease in global trade flows, with a new trend line that comes after the COVID-19 crisis. But apparently, what the WTO is predicting, as for today, is that the recovery in global trade flows will come already in 2021. So this is something that they commit to, to give as an official prediction that they already made. Fair enough. So what else? So what are the mitigation policies that were taken by the governments and other monetary and political institutions to try to reduce the burden of the cost of the crisis from firms and individuals? In fact, a very nice quotation from one of the papers that I found on the net is that shutting down the economy is not like shutting down a light bubble. It's more like shutting down a nuclear reactor. You need to do it slowly and carefully, or it melts down. Shout out for those guys who watched the Chernobyl Netflix series. So then you know what happens if you shut down, the nuclear reactor as a light bulb in a very short period of time. Okay, so a catastrophe in particular. So what are those mitigation policies that were implemented by the governments to try to have this slow and careful shutdown of the economies? So it was actually the lockdown, which means that some of the sectors of the economy have been totally stopped in order to prevent people from getting contaminated by the virus. And the aim of lockdown is, of course, to reduce the number of infections and its spread across people, to minimize geographical spread of disease, to ensure the capacity of medical sector, which is one of the main motives for implementing all of those lockdown policies, and of course save lives of people, which is something which has no price at all, and is one of the main motives for why countries and political powers they do exist, right? But apparently, this lockdown is at the cost of pushing the economy into a severe recession and reducing the growth prospects for the next decades and generations. Because what we are talking about today is a recession that is not only going to be, a temporary decrease in the value added produced in the economy, but it will, of course, reduce the production possibility for the decades, for the next periods of time that are going to be ahead of us, due to the fact that you produce lower amounts of final goods today, and the productivity of your production process is lowered. This means that the investment process is interrupted, that firms are maybe investing less or maybe investing in a different way in technological progress, and this will affect certainly the economic situation not only of our generation but also the generation of our children, as those long-term consequences of the debt crisis, for example, are going to be very long-lasting. By the way, some countries, the majority of countries, has not paid back their debt after the 2008-2009 crisis. So you see that this is a very long-term permanent shock that we are applying right now with the lockdown of industries. But of course, the aim of this lockdown is morally acceptable and morally reasonable, right? We want to avoid a situation in red in which we have no prevention measures, so that the new cases of contamination with the virus will be so high that the number of hospitalized people with this dotted line will be above the capacity of the medical sector, which is this yellow part, and this means that this would be a very dramatic situation, because people will have to be treated at home, or in a very severe case they will die on the streets, which is of course very improbable, but apparently this is what people and the authorities, the policymakers, are actually fearing. Therefore, the lockdown allows us to flatten the curve, things that we already heard a million times in the media in the last time. And this makes sense, because flattening the curve means that the capacity of the medical sector will not be exceeded, but the recession will be longer and more severe. So as you can see, the time that takes to have low number of infections is way longer than in this very severe and let's say wild scenario. And apparently, the wild scenario with the red curve shows you that the recession will be. So this is only a a graph that is to show you the idea of the fact that the recession will be less severe than in the situation of a lockdown and flattering the curve of infections while with the blue color here in the two graphs. Okay, which means that we trade people's life and people's medical safety for economic prosperity and economic safety, which of course makes sense, and this is something that that has to be taken into consideration by the authorities and policymakers. So now, what is the situation, the current situation in Luxembourg? So in Luxembourg, what we observe as of today are so in the red color you can see the active cases of infections. The green curve shows you the number of recovered people, so that the total number of infections is a sum of the two, right? And you see that we are on a very nicely, a very nice downward sloping curve in terms of active cases. There are really small numbers of new cases every day, like 10, 15, 20 people a day, which is almost nothing. Super cool, super nice. But now the question is for the policymakers, okay, so we have the economy in the lockdown, what should we do? What should we do with the economy? So is it the good moment to open up some sectors? If yes, which sectors should be opened up? Which sectors should be locked down? Still, which sectors are characterized by higher risk of contamination across workers? And which scenarios should we consider? And these are the questions that policymakers are now trying to answer in a very rapid way. And these are also the questions that the Luxembourgish government is trying to answer. And apparently, giving some quantitative answers to those questions, or simulating scenarios of what would be the situation in a counterfactual state of the world if the economy was opened in this particular pattern or in another particular pattern. This is my job right now. So this is why you haven't received your lectures on YouTube on time. Sorry for this, but apparently, this is kind of important, and apparently we got a mandate. Yesterday we got the mandate that we are going to, that our model, which I will tell you about in just a couple of minutes, is going to have the mandate to be considered by the government as one of the, one of the important helpers of, reaching the actual decisions of delocking the economy. So, this is a big thing that we are working on right now. Anyway, so what's the situation of the Luxembourg trade labor market for the moment? So you know that there are those measures that some sectors are locked down and some workers in the economy are eligible for so-called partial unemployment benefit. Now the question is, how intensive is this partial unemployment across different sectors of the economy? So what we have here are 19 sectors of the economy, including agriculture, mining, manufacturing, electric. This is electricity supply, water supply. Then we have construction, retail, travel sector, food sector, ICT, finance, real estate, or selling real estate. This is professional services and academics. This is administration, public services, education, health sector, and art and entertainment. And these are other services. And you see that we have a concentration of this partial unemployment benefits in two sectors which are super strongly hit by the crisis, which is the construction sector, which has been manually closed by the Luxembourgish government on I think 22nd of March, correct me if I'm wrong. And of course the food sector, which is almost totally closed down due to the mitigation measures of the spread of the disease. Some other sectors like public administration or financial sector, which is the biggest part of the GDP of Luxembourg, they are not affected by this particular measure at all. But they are affected by some other measures which endogenously appeared in within the sectors, within the firms. That is the programs of working from home, home office, teleworking, and things like this. Some sectors are very prone to to having this part of work arrangements. For example, the financial sector, in which 90% of people are working from home at the moment, health sector, which is kind of maybe unexpected, but apparently some doctors are also considered as remote working remotely. Some other sectors like manufacturing, construction cannot implement those measures, which is a direct problem for those particular sectors, because locking down those sectors means that those sectors are actually not operating. So to go back to the partial unemployment, in total we have 110,000 workers in Luxembourg that are under this partial unemployment scheme, and this is out of 450,000 of total workers in Luxembourg. And then 180,000 workers are actually working from home at the moment. So you can see what big share of 2/3 of the workforce of Luxembourg are actually in one of the two regimes, either on unemployment, temporary unemployment, or working from home. So now what additional measures have been taken by the government in general, including also the government of Luxembourg, to protect the economy? So the unemployment benefits, as I mentioned, including also family allowances for those who have children at home, direct help for companies, subsidies and credit lines. As I mentioned, the most important thing is to keep the jobs operating, even though the firms are not working. We need to keep the jobs operating, because losing jobs is simply having the economy totally collapsed. That is why the government is subsidizing firms to keep those jobs alive. Delaying payments of contributions and taxes, including in Luxembourg, this policy has also been implemented. Bank guarantees for credits, issues of new types of bonds, and this is something that is heavily discussed in the European Union, to have new COVID type bonds, which would be the type of Euro bonds that are not issued by each country separately, but by the European Union as a whole, and guaranteed by the European budget, or the European Union as an entity, in fact. This is something that has already been discussed in the past, and there were some countries that were very opposing to this, like the Netherlands and Germany. But now the situation changes in such a dynamic way that you never know whether in a couple of weeks or months we will have the first issuance of this type of bonds, which would be, I think that will help economies like Spain, Italy, and those other countries that really suffer from high debt and high COVID recession. And there was also a policy implemented in the US, cash payouts for all citizens, but this was ridiculous. It's not the problem with individuals that don't have money, it's a problem with firms that have to be supported in those times, not individuals. Monetary measures, immediate slash of interest rates in almost all the countries in the world. Quantitative easing, that is buying assets by central banks, huge programs led by the Federal Reserve in the US and the European Central Bank to buy assets, to inflate the balance sheets of central banks, the same policy as we had in 2008, 2009, as you remember. But now the situation is even more severe and even more, let's say, crazy from the economic point of view, because those central banks are now buying directly governmental bonds, which means this is something which is called printing money, right? So central banks are actually printing money, which is immediately transferred into the fiscal part of the authorities. And the last time a big economy had experienced something like this was Germany after the First World War, when the Weimar Republic was there. And you remember, or you know it from your history lessons, how it finished, how it ended up. It ended up in hyperinflation in Germany. That is why Hitler went to power, and that is why the Second World War was there. So you see that there are some consequences that we can expect from the policy of the authorities right now, which is something inevitable, because if you don't do this, you have those bankruptcies out there, you have people without jobs, and jobs that are actually disappearing. So we are now trading off really important things. Either we run into a severe recession right now, or we make the later generations of our kids and grandkids, to pay for this particular crisis, which is actually what's happening right now by issuing debt and financing by printing money. And of course, there is liquidity for banks as usual in every financial crisis. So okay, now let me just tell you what are the prospects for the future. And some of the prospects for the future are going to be our first estimates of the model that we want to with which we want to cooperate with the government, Luxembourgish government. So a few words about the model. So what we have out there in stock is that we have a theoretical model of Luxembourgish economy, which is composed of 19 sectors, the ones that you saw before, with cross-sector linkages, which means that in order to produce in one sector, you need some inputs from other sectors. And this is called an input-output model, which takes into consideration all the intermediate goods interlinkages across sectors. So that if you want to produce a car, you need an input from the service sector, you need an input from the electricity sector, you need an input from the manufacturing sector, from the rubber sector, and so on. So you really pin down the interconnection of sectors between each other in the economy, which means that if you lock down one particular sector of the economy, this means that all the other sectors are going to be affected because all the other sectors are using intermediate goods from this particular lockdown sector. Okay, this was the aim of this model. Then we have 4 types of workers in each sector. We have guys who are living in Luxembourg and the cross-border workers from Germany, France, and Belgium. And in each sector, apart from the economic part, we also calibrate and model the epidemic part, which is an SIR model. I guess that you must be familiar with those type of models because they are very popular right now, and depict how the pandemic and the epidemic by country is evolved over time. In a nutshell, this is a model in which you have 3 populations of people susceptible for the disease: those who are not yet infected, then people who are infected, who are actually infected right now, and those who are recovered, okay, who are actually after the disease. So in fact, the SIR model is a system of 3 dynamic first order differential equations system, and there is 1 differential equation per group here, which means that we can dynamically model, having the parameters of the model, we can dynamically model the evolution of the pandemic, right, in each sector. Then we model the supply, that is, we have some production functions by sector, and we have imports by sector, and then we model demand. We have on the demand side consumption, individual consumption, exports, and governmental expenditures. And then we have the dynamics of the model. So we solve the model in a dynamic way, and we use a time step of 1 week. So if you see, so we will see the dynamic consequences of the COVID crisis just in a couple of slides. And each time step is 1 week. Okay, and then we simulate scenarios. We simulate scenarios of that are the counterfactual simulations of the model. You remember this is the main cause why we do this modeling in economics, to have the counterfactual scenarios. And we do counterfactual scenarios regarding economic environment, for example, decreases or increases in imports and exports. The epidemic scenarios, so we can change the parameters of the epidemic model to have different projections of the number of infected people per sector. The policy scenarios, which come down to detecting infected people, for example. So how many people are actually detected to be infected? So what's the efficiency of looking for those infected people in the economy? And then the scenarios, of course, of de-lockdowning the economy. So starting with de-locking the different sectors of the economy. So what I can show you right now are some preliminary results of our simulations of the model. So here you see the timeline, which starts from the 1st of January of 2020, so before the COVID crisis, but already the exports and imports were affected due to the Chinese crisis. Then you have a week around 15, which is the mid-March, which is the lockdown of the economy and the COVID crisis, and this is the trajectory in the future for the rest of the year 2020. The first graph is the least important. This is the gross production, including the intermediate goods production and the final production. The second is the percent change, is the change relative to the initial value of the final production. So this is the GDP, all right? So this is the drop in GDP. This is the change in labor in the total Luxembourgish economy. And this is the number of infected people in the Luxembourgish economy, where the black line is the cumulative, okay? And the gray line is the actual number of currently infected people, which we are fitting to the data. So what you see is that the lockdown of the economy in the middle of March 2020 caused GDP to drop immediately by 30%. So 30% of value added is severely affected in the Luxembourgish economy. Almost 35% of people are not working at all. All right. So these are the guys who are on partial unemployment or full unemployment. And the projection of the number of infected people is stopping at around 4,500 people infected in the main scenario that we have out here. And this is in line with the projections of the epidemiologists and people who are specialists in the spread of the disease. So this is the situation of the Luxembourgish economy if the lockdown, as it was defined on the March 20, was kept until the end of the year. So you see a very severe situation that the GDP drops by 30%, which means that the average across the whole year would be more than 20% drop in GDP, which is something totally crazy. More than 30% of people will be jobless until the end of the year if the lockdown continues like this. But the optimistic thing is that the number of infected people will stop at 4,000 something number of cases, while today I'm pretty sure we have something like 3,800, or correct me if I'm wrong, something around this. All right, so we are very close to the saturation of the disease. Now, what's the consequence by sector? So for the moment, we ignore the first two graphs. So here you have the changes in the GDPs sector by sector, looking at construction and food sector, the two which are the most severe affected. Real estate sector is something that is an outlier here, and there is a modeling problem with this sector. Don't look at this. And this is the change in the labor force sector by sector. Once again, the food, construction, and also the electricity supply sector are one of the most severe ones that are hit by the crisis. All right. So now the question is, so what about the future? So you have a nice model here. So tell me, what would be the future in different scenarios of the world? I cannot answer all the questions right now because some of the answers are confidential. Other answers are not ready yet. The only thing that I can maybe show you are the things that one scenario that we simulated, which is opening up the construction sector in Luxembourg. So we assume that on 20th of April, the construction sector has been opened, which actually took place, right? So now the question is, what happens to the Luxembourgish economy if we open up only the construction sector, and we are interested in the total GDP, total labor force, the number of infected people, and here you have the full SIR model, including the number of infected who are symptomatic and asymptomatic. This is the violet line or the purple line. The green line is the recovery, the number of recovered people, both symptomatic and asymptomatic with COVID-19. And you see it goes here to around 3% of population, which is around 15,000 people in Luxembourg. All right. While here we consider only symptomatic people, which are actually recorded in the data, right? And the changes in GDP and labor across sectors. This nice colorful graph shows you only the distribution of the relative distribution of infections per sector. Different colors show you different sectors. The green color is the construction sector. The violet color is the health sector, which initially was becoming the most important later on. But that After week 30, you have almost no new infections. So even though you have almost 100% the health sector, this sums up to, I don't know, to what, 10 people, right, or 5 people per week. Here you see a different situation. So we are delocking the construction sector. First, we take an optimistic scenario in this case, which means that we consider a situation in which we are controlling very well the pandemic, okay, the spread of the disease, for example, by masks, social distancing, and some other measures. So you see a huge increase, a significant increase in GDP, which is 10 percentage points, which is significant. Huge increase in the employment in Luxembourg, and not that much increase in the number of infected people, which goes from 4,500 people to around 4,700 people, because we assume that we control the disease, the spread of the disease in the optimistic scenario. So now let's look at the pessimistic, the intermediate scenario, in which we are not that good in terms of controlling the disease. So what you see is that the number of infected people, here you see it better, this is the number of symptomatic infected people, and shows you a second peak, which is evolving, in the mid of October or November, and the number of recovered people, so those guys who already had the disease, is significantly larger than previously. Previously, we stopped at below 5,000. Here you have 8,000, and it's still increasing. So the pandemic will not end in 2010. It will still continue to 2021. And this is the curve is still flattened, but the pandemic is still going on. So this is a situation in which you have a flat infection curve, but you opened only one sector of the economy. And of course, the main source of infections is still, of course, the construction sector. So what about the pessimistic scenario? The pessimistic scenario assumes that we cannot control the disease, the spread of the disease. So what will happen in this scenario? Well, very bad things. First of all, you see a huge second peak in terms of infections. You can see the same peak here when you consider both symptomatic and asymptomatic people. 12% of the country is going to be infected. The change in GDP is not very big, but what is changing is the number of infected people, which is dramatic. And of course, it's not only the construction sector that is dominating right now, but it's also the health sector later on. But it's of less importance, of course. So here, what we are doing is we are considering the wild scenario in which you don't flatten the curve, you just infect everyone almost immediately. And of course, there is a high probability that the capacity of the health sector will not be fulfilled in this situation, right? Okay, so what are the predictions for the far future in general? First of all, a long recession, rather U-shaped recession than L-shaped recession, almost surely not a V-shaped recession. Only I think that the biggest optimists out there believe in V-shaped recession. Then what I think will happen sooner or later, but I think sooner, is huge inflation. Maybe not a hyperinflation, but a significant increase in inflation due to the supply squeeze in many goods, and of course money printing. If you print money without taking it out from the financial sector, you will definitely experience inflation. Sovereign debt crisis, additional expenditures on saving plans for employees, for firms. For sure, there will be a problem for many countries in terms of how much debt they accumulated. And the Greek crisis from the last decade will be nothing comparing to what will happen in the future. Then, if we have a debt crisis, we will have also a sovereign debt crisis. We also have firms debt crisis and bankruptcies of firms, due to the fact that even though some firms are going to be capable of producing, they will not be able to do this because of supply chains that are broken. Okay. Then unemployment and evaporation of many sectors. I'm pretty sure the sectors like transportation, tourism, small services, they are not going to recover fast from the crisis. Delocking those sectors is actually impossible in the short term. Maybe it is possible in the medium term, and hopefully you will be able to come back to the productivity you had before the crisis, but it's very questionable whether or not this is possible. Why? Well, because still, even though you open up the sectors, people will not be that much willing to use those services. Imagine yourself traveling today to, I don't know, to the US or to Spain or to Italy. Even if you had an option to take a plane, would you decide to do it today? It's questionable. Not everyone will do this. The same with tourism. People are very risk averse in terms of going for vacation this year. The same when it comes to what on land transportation, like public transport. People don't probably will not use transport that often as before. So the demand negative shock in demand is also going to be severe, and many companies are going to certainly go bankrupt. Okay, so this is a huge dose of pessimism in terms of this particular analysis, and the worst thing is that the bad things are still ahead of us. So it's not that we are already on a good track. But what can I tell you? Well, this is our job as economists to try to solve those problems and try to find some solutions that will mitigate the negative effects. What can we do? You can take the Swedish scenario and just allow people to contaminate themselves on the streets, but it's very risky. You can do it in a country which has capacity of the health sector, and but you cannot do it in Spain, Italy, or in Poland, because there you will immediately run into shortages in the health sector. So. Well, that is why we need to find solutions that are somewhere in between, that are not devastating the economy, but also they are allowing people to go through the disease in a respectful way, right? But still, there are also some optimistic things regarding the COVID crisis, and you think I might be a bit crazy right now saying things like this, but I'm trying to think in a very long term in terms of how our lives are going to be affected by the crisis. I think every crisis is a great opportunity to learn new things and to find new solutions to problems which previously were not that apparent. Take, for example, the 9/11 terroristic attacks in 2001. Like, everyone thought that this is of course many people died, and it was one of the biggest tragedies in the 21st century. But look how many positive things happened after this. You have those controls in the airports before crossing, before jumping into the aeroplane, and you feel safer because you know that no crazy person with a knife or with a gun or with some explosive will be on a plane. I'm pretty sure this is one of the most positive things that happened after this tragic terrorist attack out there. And there are examples of things like this that we can learn and improve for the future after COVID. For example, accelerated ICT-based technological change. The fact that we are talking right now in a remote way, the fact that I can put my remote video on the video with a lecture on the internet, and you can watch it whenever you want. It's a fantastic thing. It's increasing the productivity, and it's efficient because you can repeat the lecture as many times as you want. And I'm just reducing myself into this particular case of giving lectures, but there are plenty of examples of this ICT biased technological change out there with video conferences, with remote working, and so on. Then, development of biotech sector. I'm pretty sure that many people are going to invest right now huge tons of money into the biotech sector, which is better for us in the long term because we will have a better capability of fighting the disease, and maybe the genetic engineering will accelerate due to this. So apparently this might be a positive technological shock in this particular sector as well. One more, faster automation of production. Some sectors prove that they are very vulnerable to problems with the labor force. So some people might, or some investors, some entrepreneurs might start investing in automation. And of course, this is a good thing from the point of view of productivity in those sectors. But there is a big backfire out there, possible unemployment in certain occupations. So, for example, the truck drivers are going to be replaced by artificial intelligence faster than you expected without the COVID. Maybe this will be the case. Is it positive? For some it is, for others it is not. But this is how the technological progress goes on. And this relates, of course, to the discussion we had in the previous lecture 6.2 about the Trump tariffs. That the technological progress is always distributive. There are some skills and occupations that are complements to the technology, and some that are substitutes. And apparently, those who are complements are going to win from this accelerated automation, while those who are substitutes are going to be left without work. Then, more governmental investment in the medical sector. And of course, this is something that should have been done years before and decades before. And I'm pretty sure there's not a single country in the world that claims today that they have a satisfactory level of medical services. In many countries, medical sectors have been underinvested, and now this is time to, this is an incentive to invest in this sector more. And of course, unfortunately, this is after the problem has happened. Yeah, but it's better late than even later. Okay. Then another consequence is supply chain independence of countries, and this is something that is now heavily disputed also at the level of European Union. The fact that due to the COVID crisis and the supply chain breakings, some countries did not have access to some even basic goods because the production process of those basic goods was somewhere else in the world, and they were, depending on trade with some other countries. Take, for example, the masks. The masks, the simplest masks for surgeons, they are produced mainly in China, and not a single country has a sufficient supply of masks right now and sufficient production possibility of producing those masks. That is why when there was a shock in terms of COVID, many countries were under short supply of those masks. The same as I mentioned yesterday in the 6.2 lecture. The same with the medical equipment. Now the European Union is seriously considering subsidizing some strategically important sectors, even though it's not efficient, because it's efficient to produce some goods abroad where the cost of production are lower. But even though the economic motives are less important when it comes to this severe situation right now, countries, governments, and authorities want to pay more for those strategic goods produced, like medical equipment, just to have it available in the country, not to be dependent on all the other countries. There is also a big discussion whether the COVID-19 crisis is also a crisis of globalization. I'm pretty sure this is not the case, but the acceleration of globalization will be now slower, which means that there will be lower trade, lower acceleration of trade between countries, as some countries are going to be try to become independent in terms of the supply of crucial goods. Unfortunately, due to those political consequences, which we cannot predict right now, you can think that maybe some countries are going to become partially isolated due to the fact that those nationalists and populists are going to come into power and might isolate those countries. It will be very sad if this happens, but this is something you have to consider in the future. And finally, the last positive thing of the COVID-19 crisis is our new, maybe better way of living. Shopping more online, teleworking. Honestly, this is a fantastic thing, teleworking, if you don't have kids at home, apparently. Health monitoring, something that will be possibly implemented by some governments. Of course, this is a very controversial topic, because this means that government will collect more information about individual citizens, But still, if it's for a better reason, I'm pretty sure that to some extent we can liberalize the access to this type of information, health monitoring, as we did with the safety measures on at the airports after the 9/11 attacks. Then some new developments in education, like remote communication with students. I'm not a big fan of this, especially when it comes to writing exams remotely. This would be crazy. We'll talk about this next week, but there are some benefits I see, like that you have those lectures available online, and you can click them whenever you want. That's very good. Then traffic, due to the fact that traffic and pollution, in fact, due to the fact that many people are working from home and teleworking, maybe we are actually solving two problems with one actual solution. We are solving the traffic congestion problem in Luxembourg, and the air pollution out there. Possibly this is allowing people to work from home more often, who is the golden solution for the problem of traffic jams in Luxembourg. Of course, it's not considering all the occupations, all the sectors, but take researchers or professors at the university, take a big chunk of the financial sector. They can all work from home. Those guys who are working the back office, why not? Come on, allow them to work 40% of their time, 2 days per week from home, and you don't have any traffic congestion anymore. So traffic pollution environment, possibly a good consequence of the crisis. All right, so this is it. Of course, the discussion about the COVID-19 is just beginning, and partly LISER, which is my research institute, and me personally, we are going to be involved in some heavy discussions in the coming days and weeks with the government. We will feed them with some numbers, with some simulations, and we will see what they say about this and what decisions they will make. Apparently, we have to really cooperate with across different sciences, across different people with different backgrounds to find golden solutions, best solutions for the problems that we are facing right now. And the situation is really serious because we don't want to kill the economy. We also don't want to make the economy running immediately with killing people and having COVID spreading. So this is balancing on a thin line, to some extent. But I guess that the media will report everything very nicely in the coming days, and you will be aware of what is happening in the economy, in the macroeconomy, at the Luxembourgish, European, and the global level, right? And it's very good for you in general, so that you know what's happening out there, so that you understand what are the mechanisms behind, knowing the macroeconomic models we developed, knowing the consequences of some policies that we analyzed, and knowing what we can expect in the near, medium run, and long-term future. All right, so this would be the end of the COVID lecture. I planned it to last not more than 45 minutes. You see, I'm talking too much. It's now 1 hour and 15 minutes. Okay, I don't give a shit. What you can do, right? This is an important topic, and there were some things I wanted to tell you. It's not as good as as if I knew everything about this. I just touched some particular elements of this whole macroeconomic problem, and the rest, if you have some questions, ideas, I'm open to discussion with you guys on Moodle or below the YouTube video, whatever you like. There's one more thing to finish up the lecture today, is small homework about one of the shocks that we experienced last year, and nobody gives a crap right now about this because this is something totally totally unimportant in this current situation, which is the Brexit. And initially this part of the lecture was about Brexit, and I thought that this is useless to talk about Brexit right now, but it is useful for you guys to have your own thoughts, so that you individually think about what are the consequences of Brexit. If you forget about COVID-19 and all this mess that is happening with COVID-19, what are the crude, basic consequences of Brexit? That is, leaving the UK from the European Union. What would be the consequence for the UK exchange rates, nominal exchange rate, the real exchange rates, the UK's exports, imports, price levels, interest rates, net migration as well, if you can think about those consequences. What policies might be useful to save the UK economy in terms of fiscal policy, monetary policy, international exchange policy, and what are the long-term consequences of those policies? These are very broad questions, and in fact, what I can propose is that in the next week at tutorial 3, is here, I will prepare some questions, some how to call it. Okay, maybe I started from the beginning. So the exam for the course is going to be totally different than what I planned to do. Because as you know, I planned to have a computational exam plus some additional theoretical questions plus some policy relevant questions. Now this is all going to be thrown away, and I'm changing the way of doing the exam. As I mentioned in the email, I'm going to prepare a quiz on Moodle with multiple choice questions, and some of those questions or some examples of those questions are going to be analyzed in tutorial 3. And some of those questions are going to relate to those basic consequences of Brexit as well. But of course, I don't expect that everyone has to answer those questions. Consider those additional questions as the questions for a note of 18 and above, okay? For those guys who are really going to push hard and show me that they know what macroeconomics is about, okay? This I'm okay. But apparently, the questions I'm gonna prepare for tutorial 3 are going to be example questions of what you can expect in this quiz that I'm going to prepare for you in the for the exam. So there will be 3 types of questions as well. There will be questions to compute something, but they will be way shorter than the questions that we analyzed in the tutorial sessions. But there will be something to be computed, and there will be something similar to what we did in the class. Normally, I will not give you anything that has not been analyzed in the class. All right. So if there was something not analyzed in the class, you can do it yourself. I will give you the answers, but it's something that goes beyond the standard program of the course. So this is the first type of question. Then the second type of question are going to be some theoretical questions, but once again, this is going to be a multiple choice question. So you will have some potential answers. Some of them are going to be true, some of them are going to be false. And finally, there are going to be policy relevant questions. And this is going to be a big chunk of the big part of the exam, and this will include the financial crisis of 2008-2009. Some of the questions we're going to analyze. I got questions from you guys about analyzing those questions. We are going to do this in the tutorial 3. Questions about lecture 6, so the Argentine crisis mechanisms, about the tariffs and about COVID, and of course about Brexit. But Brexit, you can consider this as questions for the guys who want to have higher notes. So I hope everything will be clear in next week when I prepare the tutorial session. And I suggest something like this. I will prepare one video for 1 hour and 20 minutes. I will give you the examples of the questions. Okay, I will answer them and analyze what is important for the exam, what types of questions you can. So not only the types of questions, but also the content of the exam. I will analyze this. It will take me hopefully 1 hour 15 minutes, and then you will have few days to ask me questions. What is important, what should you focus on, or whatever. I will tell you this, but if you still have questions, you send me emails. I answer the questions, and either I do it by mail or I will provide one more video, which will be the second part of tutorial 3. But this will not be the next Monday. This would be later on when you send me the questions. So the baseline is that next Monday I will prepare for you a tutorial 3.1 lecture with examples of questions and what is important for the exam. And then you get 3 or 4 days to think about this and try to schedule your preparation. And you find something that is, if you find something that is not clear, you just write me an email, and then I either prepare a new video 3.2, which I will give you a week later, or I simply answer your questions online by email. All right, cool. Hopefully that you enjoyed this particular lecture 6, because this is also something important in this course, to have a policy relevant debate of not to stupidly analyze those simple theoretical models, but to have a relation between what is with the reality. All right, and actually the reality is now becoming so complex that simple models are not enough. All right, so this will be the end for today, and thanks for your attention, and see you next week. And remember, you can always write me an email with any question that you have. So enjoy the rest of the week, and see you next week.